So we are continuing on with our We Are Gathered Here series, and today we look at the topic of strength. And to begin this morning, we're going to do something a little different. I would like to read one of Aesop's fables. And this one is called The Bundle of Sticks. So listen in here for a second. A certain father had a family of sons who were forever quarreling among themselves. No words he could say did the least good. So he cast about in his mind for some very striking example that should make them see that discord would lead them to misfortune. One day, when the quarreling had been much more violent than usual, and each of the sons was moping in a surly manner, he asked one of them to bring him a bundle of sticks. Then, handing the bundle to each of his sons, in turn he told them to try to break it. But although each one tried his best, none was able to do so. The father then untied the bundle and gave the sticks to his sons to break one by one. They did this very easily. My sons, said the father, do you not see how certain it is that if you agree with each other and help each other, it will be impossible for your enemies to injure you? But if you are divided among yourselves, you will be no stronger than a single stick in this bundle. Now I realize that's like a simple children's fable. Okay? I get that, and it could be applied to a number of situations, and perhaps this morning your mind went a different direction with that, and that's cool. Okay? That's understandable. There's a lot of things, as I was reading that, you could have applied that lesson. However, for the church, there's a simple and there's a powerful lesson to be found in there, and it's that we are stronger together than we are alone. I assume because you're here online in person, you kind of know that. Now, along with that, it probably isn't surprising, but currently people are living a much more lonely, more isolated lives than in the past. And there's research to back this up. And according to some of that research I was looking at, which was actually, this was done back in 2015, so it's a little bit outdated, which is scary to say out loud. 2015 is a little while ago, goodness. But Americans currently, at least in 2015, have 1/3 fewer close friends and relationships than they had just 2 decades before. So we're talking 2015, 1995. In that gap, 1/3 fewer close friends and relationships. And this trend, as we probably know, we could acknowledge, it's not really heading in a positive direction as we enter our new decade here in 2021. And the result of this is an epidemic of loneliness and division. And loneliness and division are valid indicators of lives that are lived with a lack of real connection. And in this work, Dr. Martin Seligman writes about this research even further. He says, depression is now 10 times as prevalent as it was in the 1960s, and it strikes at a much younger age. Back in the 60s, the mean age of a person's first episode of depression was actually 29 and a half years old. When this was written in 2015, it was 14 and a half is the mean age of your first battle with depression. He goes on to say that this is a paradox, since every objective indicator of well-being, and he lists our purchasing power, our amount of education, our availability of music, thanks iTunes, and our availability of good nutrition, all of that has been improving. It's been going north. While every indicator of subjective well-being is getting worse. It's going south. I don't think that's surprising to anyone, is it? We know that. We live it every day. People are lonely. People are desperate for some encouragement. There is a desire to be part of something that really matters and to belong to something that is bigger than ourselves. But we are reaching a true crisis point. And the result is an opportunity, a really good opportunity for the church. But maybe not how you think of opportunity, because many times, at least my almost, not quite 40 years, 38 years tomorrow, in the church, we've been playing by a scorecard that is all about butts, rear ends in seats, bucks, and baptisms. Now, baptisms are a good thing, but we've been playing off that scorecard. That's the only measurable. But this opportunity isn't about church growth. It isn't about church success, what we use as the scorecard. Rather, the opportunity is about us really being the family of God in an urgent situation around us. Because as we are talking about today, and we've been talking about, we are gathered here for strength. The church body comes together for strength. So this morning we are going to look at what might be a familiar text. It shows up like in weddings and some different things often, but it's out of Ecclesiastes. So this is Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 9 through 12. We'll read it here. Dave, you'll have to throw up a different background. Anything will work to darken that a little bit. But here we go. You can follow along. We'll get there. If you have really good eyes, you can figure it out. You'll get there. But here we go. This says, 2 are better than 1, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. This morning, we're going to kind of break that down. We're going to talk about this idea of gathering for strength. And so right out of the gate, it talks about 2 are better than 1. In this first verse in our main text we just read, it's talking about tasks that are done better. They are better done by 2 or more people. And that doesn't sound like anything new to you, because I feel like we've been talking about this for months, right? And I say that all the time, and I've heard other people say better together, and I'm like, woohoo, look at that. I don't know where I heard it, where you heard it. Maybe it was all of us together, but it's true. And we've been talking about that to come together for a communal objective, to gather with other people, is truly an act of being unselfish. It's putting other people's needs along with yours. See, to work and to labor for one another so that we all have a good result is to actually demonstrate that we are better together. When I say better together, one of the stories from the Bible that always jumps to my mind, it's one of my personal favorites. Everybody gets their favorites. It's one of my favorites, is the healing of the paralytic, or the healing of the paralyzed man. And that's one that we get in the first 3 Gospels, known as the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's in each one. It's a little different. We're going to read just the first little bit out of Mark today. You can follow along in case you are not familiar with this story. It says this: a few days later, when Jesus again entered Capernaum, the people heard that he had come home. So many gathered that there was no room left, not even outside the door. And he preached the word to them. Some men came, bringing to him a paralytic, carried by 4 of them. Since they could not get him to Jesus because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof above Jesus. After digging through it, they lowered the mat the paralyzed man was lying on, down in front of Jesus. And we'll pause it for there. If you don't know that account, we're not going to teach on that account, because I've done that before. We're not going to do that today. But check that out. Mark 2, right at the beginning. You'll find it. But when we think about that story, these 4 friends that did something that isn't easy, digging through a roof. I mean, that is the visual demonstration that we get in our minds of what it looks like when we say that we are better together. That's it right there, that visual. Hold that in your mind as we think about what does it actually look like to be better together. 4 friends lugging around their friend on a mat, even digging through a roof. That looks like better together. Our main text would continue, and I want to reread these verses so we don't lose track of all that. So in verse 10 it says, if either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Now this is a practical observation, right? I appreciate when the Bible's very practical, to the point. This is a practical observation for so many of us, and especially any of us who've experienced life either on our own or with someone close to us that is a bit more vulnerable. You think of maybe older folks, older people, maybe those with a physical handicap, or maybe just some major physical limitations. We know it isn't good for us to live entirely alone without caring companions. And I'm not sure why, but my Grandma Mayju always makes it into my messages. I wish you all could have met my Grandma Mayju, but I think when you only get one living grandparent, they're really, really, really special. But my Grandma Mayju lived to just over 100 years old, and about the time when she was 94, she started having some falling episodes. And finally, the last one for her, no, she didn't die. That sounds like she passed away from this, but she broke her arm. And at that point, it wasn't just bumps and bruises. This is serious. We've got to do something. And so my mom, along with her 4 sisters and her brother, all decided to start a rotating calendar. For about 6.5 years, they did in-home care so that Grandma was never left alone overnight where she might fall and have an issue with that. And I know that's not uncommon. Many of you have spent time caring for your loved ones or someone in need, or maybe that's even what your employment is. But I've heard a good friend of mine say this way, that you can tell who are our true friends because when we are in trouble, they are the ones that do not leave us. And I assume that you gather here for the strength that comes from joining together with true friends. I know some of y'all are really true friends. You're the kind of people that if we called you at 2 a.m., this is what you're thinking about. This is the kind of person, a true friend. You call them at 2 a.m. and you need them. They're the person on the other line of the phone that they don't need every single detail before deciding whether to come help or not. They're the person that asks where you are as they're throwing on their clothes, as they're getting their shoes on to get out the door to come help you. When you think of a true friend, that's a true friend. Jesus talked about it this way in Matthew 25, which is a familiar chunk of text. He says this. He says, "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me.'" Then we skip down. Verse 40 now says, "The king will reply, 'I tell you the truth, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me.'" We recognize the fact that we gather together for strength because each of us have experience, right, with that fact that support matters. As we continue on, the main text out of Ecclesiastes says this in verse 11. It says, "Also, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone?" Again, pretty practical text. We know what that's like to be a little chilly. You got to get those extra blankets out. Maybe some of you, anybody got an electric blanket? Because when I talk, I would die under that, I think. But some of y'all, I know, you're like, I got the frigid toes all winter long, and I need that. So the picture here is being alone in a cold room. And the ancient solution to this was to get as many people together as you could and generate a lot of body heat. And the truth is, we still do that today. And here's a really fun example. So I'm the first one here on Sunday mornings, always. And even in the winter, we keep this little thermostat up here at about 62 degrees. And some of you know that, because you walk in, you're like, it's a little chilly. But there's a reason for this. And now, unfortunately, the band, when they come in early, the sound and the media folks, they endure that 62. But it's interesting because by the time we start with our gathering at about 10 o'clock, it's usually up to about 68 degrees. And by the time we leave, especially when it's really full in here, it's like 75 degrees. So we kind of start low so that we don't completely roast everybody out and see palm trees starting to sprout out of the carpet here. So that might be kind of nice, but that doesn't happen. But this is the idea here that, like, it's cold when it's no one in here. It's cold. Isolation's cold. When I walk in, always in the morning, my hands are a little chilly. I can't wait to make some of that coffee so I can warm up a little too. But this applies also, this idea that isolation is cold, it applies to spiritual coldness as well. See, every one of us has experienced those times when we suffer from what I would just call cold spirituality. Boy, there's nothing there. Feels like the fears have set in. Maybe you feel like all the uncertainties of life are overwhelming. You're asking the questions that we would always pick on our little people for asking. Why is this not fair? Like, what is fair? Why me? I get it. It's the times like that even as you try to read the Bible, you just feel like some of those promises feel really hollow right now. That fire you used to have, you look back on your experience, you're like, man, I used to be so fired up for this. It seems to be out. Gone is the excitement of even participating and gathering together in a Christian community. Maybe it seems like the light, the spark in your eye has gone out. I think that's a real part of life. So don't take that as chastisement. But it's in those times, isolation feels cold, and we need to be encouraged. We need the warmth of Christian fellowship. We need to be filled with a new energy, with a new faith of encouragement, and we need hope. I want to share a story real quick with you, but I got to give credit where credit's due. The first person I heard tell this story, and there's a chance that means that you have heard it, is our good friend Pastor Dave Perry. Now, I'm not nearly as good a storyteller as Dave, so just bear with me. But the story is really good, and you've probably heard this before anyway. But one day, a pastor stopped by a man's house to pay him a visit. And this man was a member of the local church, but he hadn't been there in quite a long time. And so as they went into the house, and they had a seat there by the fireplace, they're talking, and when you get two dudes together, they're probably talking about sports, hunting or fishing, or the weather. So they were probably talking about one of those. Let's go with weather. They're chatting about the weather. But anyway, as they're just kind of chatting along, eventually the pastor leans over and he plucks out an ember out of the fire and he puts it right there in front of the fire on the hearth. Without saying a word, these two, they just kind of stop talking and they're just staring at that ember. Sure enough, that ember, as we would all know, we've experienced this, it starts to work its way black from the outside, and the red that it was glowing like starts to work more towards a smaller spot in the middle. Soon it's about to lose all of that red-hot glow. At that point, the pastor knocks it back into the fire. And wouldn't you know, it kicks back up, gets hot again. The ember takes right back off. So there's a little less talking still. They're just there. And eventually the man leans over to the pastor and he softly says, "I'll be back this week." Our main text out of Ecclesiastes continues on now in the first half of verse 12, and it says, "Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves." Now, overpowered here can mean the same as overwhelming, which maybe is a little more familiar to us because overpowered, I hope you haven't experienced like being overpowered unless you're just trying to tow a trailer and you got a half ton and you need a 3/4 ton or bigger. Maybe something like that. But we think about overwhelmed because that's a feeling that I think during the last year or so, we've probably all had a little familiar moments with that. But when I read this particular part of the passage, one thing that comes to mind right away is one of my favorite movies, and that's Forrest Gump. I've always loved the movie Forrest Gump. Me and Jeff quote Forrest Gump often. It's a good movie. And when I think about this, I think about specifically Forrest and Bubba. They're over in Vietnam at the time, and they're out on duty. And they talk about, let's sleep with our backs against each other so that way we don't have to sleep with our heads in the mud, our faces in the mud. And I love that. I've always loved that. And in this way, with this two together, neither of them had to suffer with their head and their face in the mud. They could catch a little shut-eye, one of them could, while the other kept watch, and vice versa. I mean, that's a really good illustration. Now, I didn't do military time. The folks who have, I actually just talked to Bruce yesterday. We talked a little bit about that. And I know that's one illustration, but many of us have had experience also with sports and sports teams, being part of a team sport. And if you have at all with that, you know that there's like conditioning, and there's a lot of work, and there's a lot of sweat, and there's a lot of suffering together in order to get to the competition, the chance to excel on the field and win. And so that's what you do. You suffer together, you sweat together, you prepare together so that you can compete together. And what I've always loved about team sports, and I've seen this at all levels, I guess I don't interact with the professionals much because they're too cool for all of us, aren't they? But even college level, how even when the things aren't going well, even when you're going to get beat in whatever competition there is, teammates make sure that everybody still finishes together. Sure, there's some people that are upset over on the sideline because I'm a football guy, so maybe the wide receiver dropped the pass that could have won the game. But there's always a few people that go over to that wide receiver and they're trying to pick that person up. People make sure on a team sport that you finish together, that you wouldn't be overwhelmed and overcome by the situation. And we get this, right? That the truth is life does get heavy sometimes. Maybe right now it feels like all the time. That's possible too. It feels like our knees are about to give out. We fear coming up short of the finish line. And the truth is we need friends. We need partners to help us along. We talked about it in week 1 of this series, that we need friends to spur us on, to help bear the load when we can't, to help sharpen us when we've gotten a little dull. See, some of us today are in need of some good teammates. Some of us feel like we're about to go down unless we get some help. Because the truth is everybody needs the strength of others sometime in order to not be overpowered by the crushing load of life. What we have continued to call for the last many weeks, the full human experience. No one's exempt. There's going to be crushing times. I heard this story recently. Man, something about when you hang out with pastors, everybody is telling stories. And I dig that, because then they come out in sermons. But this was great. So the story is about a little boy who was frightened one night during a thunderstorm. And he was really terrified. It was a really scary storm. So from his bed, he called out to his mom. He said, "Mom, I'm scared." And his mother, who's in bed, this is the nighttime, like any good parent, not wanting to get out of bed. Oh, amen to that, right? Needing your sleep. The mom calls back, didn't want to get out of bed right away. She says, "Don't worry. God loves you and will take care of you." So for a little while, there was some silence from this little boy. And eventually, the mom heard the little boy say, "I know God loves me, but right now, I need somebody with skin on." See, the presence of another to help keep us from being and experiencing the overwhelming parts of life, we have to have the presence of another because it's vital. If you don't remember anything else, remember that. We've talked about it, we've called it in a much more, churched up way. We call it embodying Jesus Christ for others. We get a chance to embody the love of God for other people. Sometimes people don't just need your thoughts and prayers. They need somebody with skin on, right? Our last point here on the second half of verse 12 is that a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. And I put 3 as the magic number because I love Schoolhouse Rock. So that's like one of my favorites. So I want to read you, if you know that song, it's going to be in your head the rest of the day. That's my gift to you. That's okay. But here's just a few of the lyrics. They're not going to be on the screen, so you just have to listen in. This is the beginning of the song. It says, "Somewhere in the ancient mystic Trinity, you get 3 as a magic number. The past and the present and the future. The faith and hope and charity. The heart and the brain and the body gives you 3 as a magic number." It was hard to not read that like in a little bit of cadence with the song. So you see, so this main text, and I want to read it one more time to you, the little bit. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. See, many times that particular text in the Bible is used in connections with weddings and marriages, and I think that's for a really good reason, because what is being said is that the best way for our relationships to reach full strength, for our relationships to fully help us make life together in communities and with others work, is with Jesus Christ in the center. Because with Christ in our relationships, our lives actually have extra support. And hear me when I say this, because that sounds really good, right? That sounds like something we're going to hear in church. And it sounds a little platitudey, like, well, we put Christ in the center of the relationship and it just didn't work out. I sat back and ate Cheetos and watched TV and this person did whatever. Like, that's not how it works. That makes it a platitude. Because we don't get to just sit back and hope that Jesus will just make things work out all nice and tidy like. Rather, what it means is just like in the fable in the beginning of our message, we don't have to go it alone. That's what the good news of that is. Not that Jesus is just going to magically make everything work really well for us. We don't have to go it alone, folks. We are not meant to be divided, and we are not meant to be left without help. Instead, we actually have the opportunity to unite with one another. And with Christ at the center point of that unity, we begin to experience a much stronger bond together as the family of God. That's encouragement. That's strength. So today, as I always do, I want to give you just like 2 actionable steps, two handles along the way, because we know this stuff. I don't think there was anything I just said, maybe some fun stories, which is good. I don't think there's anything I really said there that you guys don't know. We look around this room, folks gathering online, like we know this. It's pretty practical stuff. So then how do we begin to continue to implement this? If you're feeling a little isolated, if you're feeling a little left out, you're feeling like, man, I need something more. I need that encouragement. What can we do? So first actionable step, I'm going to encourage you to do the work and lean into relationships. You got to ask yourself a couple quick questions here as we think about this. Do you have some deep friendships in your life? I would hope many of you can say, yeah, I do see some head nodding, and that's good. Because you throw a question like that out there, and that really can sting. And if you don't feel like you have a lot of deep friendships, I can understand that. It's amazing how time, I keep referencing my age, but I'll be 38 tomorrow. And I think about all the friendships, how they've like hide and load. And some, because you leave an area, you actually do leave that behind. And that's okay. That happens. And then as you think about those deep friendships, I wonder about how about a few close and meaningful friends even here within our church family? Do you have any of those? Because if you remember the research that we mentioned at the beginning of the message, most of us have 1/3 less close friends than previous generations. That's interesting, isn't it? I wonder if that's true for you. There's also some Barna research out there that has revealed that those who are surveyed feel that There's some Barna research that has revealed that those surveyed who feel they have a healthy sense of belonging, healthy sense of community within their church congregation, they said they have an average of 7 vital relationships. I thought that was a pretty good number. 7 vital. They add that vital in there, and you're like, oh, man. And I think that's pretty interesting, and this is because it echoes what we've been discussing a lot lately, that God never intended us to just get together on a Sunday morning for an hour and 15 minutes and call it good. To think that that would somehow be the extent of what we do as a church family, a community of believers, that's not been the goal ever. So you ask yourself, are you feeling a little beaten down? Do you feel left out? Do you feel isolated? Then I'm going to ask you to do the work to make the effort to lean into relationships with others. That might mean new relationships, which is really exciting, because it's fun to get to know people. It's fun to see some of those common threads throughout your life experiences. And then certainly you still, like anyone who knows, boy, just having a mom and dad, and you have to keep that relationship working. Old relationships take work too, right? You have to lean into relationships with others. And it does take courage. It takes vulnerability, and it takes a willingness to listen to others and to understand others. So if you are feeling isolated, if you are feeling lonely, which we talked about at the beginning, there is an epidemic of loneliness right now and division. If that's you, join me, because I'm doing this too. We got to lean into relationships. And then what goes right along with that, our second step, is this, is look for partners and mentors. Look for partners and mentors. Think about what are the things you care about most in your life. What are those most meaningful experiences that you have had and that you continue to have? Because God has given each one of us special desires and gifts that help shape our participation in the world around us and absolutely our participation in this particular family of God. And as we've acknowledged today already, we are not created to go it alone. There are others that care about what you care about. There are so many others that are experiencing the same or at least very similar things that you are. And we need to take those commonalities we have and look for partners. Look for a mentor or someone that we can mentor. And when we talk about that word mentor, I get it that, and maybe you guys are way more mature than me. I hope you are. That's not to make, because when I hear mentor, that's a scary word, right? It's easy to get intimidated by the word mentor or mentoring. But being mentored or being the one doing the mentoring is as easy as this. It's sharing a cup of coffee. It's sharing a meal. It could be a FaceTime call or whatever Android people use. Sorry, I don't know what that's called. Such an iPhone snob, sorry. But it really can be as easy as sharing a meal, sharing some coffee, sharing a FaceTime call with another person once a month and asking real questions. Like, how are you doing? Not the pleasantry we exchange as we move through our day quickly, like, hey, how's it going? Where I don't really care, I'm on my way, see ya. No. It's actually, how are you doing? How is your soul today? What are your current needs? What wants and desires in your life aren't being met? See, the reality is you just need to be a friend first and foremost. And a friend is simply present to listen to encourage, and to pray for that person. And hear this, church family, because this is where I've struggled for most of my life. Each of us needs to stop with the idea that we have to be a perfect Christian, and I use that in quotes, in order to mentor someone else. And we also, on the other side of this, have to stop with this idea that we have to be all tidied up, at least, put stuff in that closet and shut the door real quick before it comes piling out, before I would ever be able to be mentored by someone and open myself up to that. Both of those, we got to stop that. All we have to do is be willing. Be willing. Because to fully live out God's calling on each of our lives, we need other people. And we are only going to know what experiences we have in common with others if we keep communicating our stories with each other, sharing our life experiences, making it a point to ask about someone's week and about their situation, and then listening to them so you know where to look for ways to come alongside them and then to know them more deeply. I mean, that's how you do this, right? Isn't that how you become friends with people? I know for some of us, we learned that like in grade school, and if those friends aren't still our friends, it's a little bit weird and clunky making new friends. But that's how you do this. You have to listen. You have to engage. You have to share the story so you know where you could even be a support and a care in their lives and come alongside. See, we do this too because this is an honest part of discipleship that not only benefits here in the body of Christ, but folks, then we take this and we apply it to the world as we interact with the world too. Because each of us is not going to find our full connectability, our most full support, and the best strengthened way of living until we are given over to living alongside of our brothers and our sisters. And I assume because you're here today, I assume because you're gathering online with us today, that you know that we best do this as a community of faith gathering together for strength.